All right, welcome to workshop number 1, week 1. So what is plagiarism? This is a quote from Klein's. Plagiarism is intentionally or unintentionally giving the impression that words or ideas from another source are your own. So I think this is a great brief definition of what plagiarism constitutes. It highlights the fact that it can be intentional or unintentional. Sometimes students don't realize they're plagiarizing, but the lack of awareness doesn't eliminate the fact that plagiarism is occurring. So that's why it's very important to be conscious of what constitutes plagiarism as you go into academic writing. It's very important. So the definition then of what plagiarism exactly is giving the impression that words or ideas belong to you that originally weren't your own. So I think this brief little quote helps to summarize what exactly plagiarism is. So with that in mind, plagiarism can take many different forms. I think we typically think of plagiarism as the classic cases of having somebody else write your paper for you or purchasing a paper offline, something along those lines. But the forms of plagiarism can take many different forms. And so it's important to understand the distinctions then, because it's not always super clear or obvious that it's plagiarism. So for example, a word-for-word copy of a text without quotation marks or citations is a form of plagiarism. So copying a text but forgetting the quotation marks or forgetting the in-text citation, that constitutes plagiarism. Changing a few words around but leaving the essence of the copied passage is also plagiarism. So just going in and changing a few words still constitutes plagiarism. Number 3 is including a quote, forgetting the quotation marks. So once again, those quotation marks are really important when you're doing a word-for-word quote to signal that this thought is not your own. It belongs to someone else. Number 4 is paraphrasing or summarizing, but forgetting to include that citation. So even when you're paraphrasing someone else's ideas or summing up a chapter or a book or something along those lines, but you forget to put in the citation of whose original words or ideas those belong to, that constitutes plagiarism as well. Any form of misrepresenting the original source, so suggesting that they're talking about something that they didn't quite touch on, is also plagiarism. So that's why it's really important to be an analytical and critical reader to make sure that you fully understand the source and what they're communicating so that you accurately represent their ideas and aren't misrepresenting what they're trying to communicate. And finally, overquoting in a paper is another form of plagiarism. This is one that I think we don't often think about, but by including too many quotes, you lose the voice of the writer. And that is actually a form of plagiarism. So it's taking too many other people's ideas and putting them all together into a paper, but you've lost your own voice in your writing. So these are 6 different types and forms of plagiarism. So make sure you review this list and look over it in detail and understand exactly what each one of these looks like. So from an ethical standpoint, why is plagiarism an issue? And do we have a moral responsibility to give credit where credit is due? So this is a kind of an important question. Why is this even an issue? Well, this can be answered in 2 different ways. From a practical standpoint, and I think from also a moral standpoint. But practically, we can understand plagiarism as, well, it's stealing, right? It's taking something that you were not the originator of or the creator of and passing it off as your own. You think of the same as taking a piece of artwork and claiming that you were the artist who painted the work. that's an act of stealing. Somebody else was the creative mind and the skill behind that piece of artwork that you're claiming as your own. So, from a practical standpoint, plagiarism equals stealing. Stealing is obviously wrong, and wrong actions often result in consequences. Most universities or colleges look very poorly on plagiarism. The results of plagiarism can vary from failing an assignment to failing a course to actually being kicked out of a university. So the effects of plagiarism are quite steep, and so it's important to understand its significance. But I think more importantly, as Christians, it has more of a moral question behind it. Why is plagiarism wrong? And I think really importantly, we are called to live a life of honesty and integrity. And plagiarism in its essence is an act of dishonesty. It's not being honest, and it's not living with moral integrity. Okay, so I want to go through a couple examples and practices in order to recognize plagiarism, so that you feel like you're fully aware of how to identify plagiarism. So first of all, I want to go over common knowledge that does not require citation. So information that is common knowledge does not require you to do some form of in-text citation, okay? Unless you're quoting it word for word from a different text. If you're capturing the way it's described in a sentence, then you'd put quotation marks with an in-text citation. But if it's common knowledge, you generally do not need to include a citation. So common knowledge could be things like Barack Obama was the first African American president. The sun rises in the east and sets in the west. World War II started on September 1st, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland. And a phrase like never look a gift horse in the mouth. This is all common knowledge or common sayings, and as such, they don't require a citation. Okay? Okay, the next example is patchwork plagiarism. And so you can read through the full original paragraph, but notice that in the plagiarized form, what this individual has done is they've taken bits and pieces of the original in the same exact wording and included it without quotations. So things like global tensions and iniquities, and grassroots basis, and I believe economic competition. Those are all words, phrases that are used in the original that this individual has taken and put together, but hasn't included quotation marks. So once again, we see an example of plagiarism. The next example is called paraphrasing without documentation. So here the individual has properly paraphrased the original. So they've held to the essence of what the original says, but used new word order, used new wording, new structure in order to communicate what was said in the original, but what is missing is the in-text citation or the documentation. So it doesn't tell us who the author is and the page number where this information came from. So once again, this is considered plagiarism. Another form of plagiarism is paraphrasing with incomplete documentation. So once again, this individual has done a great job to paraphrase the original, put it in their own wording, while maintaining the essence of what's being said in the original. However, notice that the citation should come at the very end of that paragraph. Here, the in-text citation LS23 has been placed after the first sentence. However, that entire paragraph there is all paraphrased. So the citation really should come at the very end of the paragraph, not at the beginning. So it isn't clear that what follows is also from the original. So that citation must come at the end. And finally, the final example of plagiarized text is misrepresentation of original sources. So this is where the student has taken the original, but they haven't quite captured the essence of the original. So the main ideas being communicated in the original haven't been fully represented. So they've kind of said that the original was saying something that it didn't say. So although it has the author's name Ellis, they even included the date here, 2013, and the page number. So our documentation's correct. We've got the correct in-text citation. They've misrepresented the main ideas. And so therefore, once again, that is an example of plagiarism. Okay. So I recommend you go back through the slideshow, look through it again, make sure you fully understand these different examples and how each one of them represents a form of plagiarism. You also have 2 readings to go along with the slideshow. One of them is from Booth, and he's talking about ethics and what it means to be part of the academic community and how important it is to be ethical in our writing. And then the second article is actually linked on your workshop 1. It's a link to an online article, and it's talking about plagiarism from a Christian perspective. So use both of those articles and the slideshow as you craft your paper for this week. It's a 1 to 2 page paper looking at this question of ethical writing. All right, thank you. Bye. For writing, today, this first lesson, we're going to go over research ethics and plagiarism. But before we get into the lesson, I do want to say a few words about the structure for each week, just to make sure it's clear. So we have a lot of material to cover in the 5-week period. So each week, you will do 3 elements per week. The first element is a lesson, which will have some sort of writing assignment and attachment to that lesson. There will be a grammar review with a quiz, and then there will be a critical thinking exercise or a critical thinking reading with a discussion question. So make sure each week you're doing each one of those elements, as they will all be important towards crafting your final paper by week 5. So make sure you review the syllabus in detail and each week workshop in detail that you're tracking with all the information being provided. So the first lesson, as I said, is on research ethics and plagiarism. So let's get started.